So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Pennsylvania Care Partnership Cultural and Linguistic Competency webinar series for 2020. We're really excited to have you all joining us either via phone or hopefully via your computers today to see the wonderful presentation that we have. We are going to hold the line for a few moments as we wait for a few other folks to sign on. Please remember to have your lines muted until, unless you have a question or some type of technological difficulty. We also encourage you in the chat box to please introduce yourself, provide your name, affiliation, and your county or location that you're participating from today. And so with that, we also have included today's PowerPoints in the chat box as files for download for everyone. And we will also repost those at the end of the meeting if anyone's having any trouble accessing them. Okay, so I think we will get started. Again, for those that are on the phone and waiting for the PowerPoint, just give us a few minutes. We may get started, but we'll get those slides to you so you can catch up with where we are at in the presentation. So we really want to thank all of you for signing on today for the first installment of our CLC webinar series. My name is Kelsey Leonard. I'm the Cultural and Linguistic Competence Coordinator for the Pennsylvania System of Care Partnership, Pennsylvania Care Partnership as we're currently known, and just really excited to be here with you to be able to provide this portion of our technical assistance to folks across Pennsylvania, to some of our system partners and those that have their own systems of care in a variety of our counties across the state, and more so really to be able to introduce you to someone who I think is just going to be marvelous in building our knowledge and awareness when it comes to our work with communities. And so with that, our keynote speaker for today is Jaiden Love. Jaiden, as a healer, is passionate about others doing their own inner work to be able to live their truth and happiest life. As an educator, Jaiden strives to give people the tools to treat others with more compassion and respect. The combination of the two allows him to create and hold a safe space for people to reach the ultimate goal of greater connectedness and love in this world. In 2017, Jaiden published his first book. It is an intimate account of his first year transitioning from female to male. He had every intention of living a stealth life as male until he was shown otherwise. Although he only proclaims to be the expert of his own body and experience, Jaiden has now opened himself and his life up to educate others. And we are just so excited to have you with us today, Jaiden, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us. So we're actually going to start with something that I call a mindful minute. So if everyone, unless you're driving, of course, if everyone would either close their eyes or lower their gaze down towards the floor for just a moment. And don't worry, nobody can see you. And if you're driving, please stay mindful to the road. And just take a deep breath right now, where you are. Perhaps it's the longest, deepest breath that you have taken all day so far. Just breathing into your body, getting present into this moment, into your body. Here with us. And now just get present just for a moment to your thoughts. Are you thinking about your to-do list? Are you thinking about a question you already have for me? Thinking about your grocery list, whatever it is, what are you present to in this moment? And now I'm going to share a couple of statistics with you. You can continue to keep your eyes closed just for a moment. 41% of trans adults attempt suicide every year. 51% of trans youth attempt suicide every year. And I just want you to take one more deep breath and breathe that in. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So 41%, like I said, of trans adults and 51% of trans youth. These are staggering numbers. And these are just of the ones that are reported, right? Like often suicide is still shamed in our country. And so therefore a lot of people don't even report it, right? So I imagine that these numbers are quite a bit higher than this at times. And this is exactly why I do this work that I'm doing, to help lower these numbers. And maybe some of you might be wondering, well, how, by talking about it, how is that lowering the numbers? Well, I'll tell you the main two reasons that trans folks attempt suicide or commit suicide are, one, either because they are have no support, and primarily family support, or two, because they are not allowed to transition medically. So by me sharing this information and educating folks, well, let me back up a quick second. So as you know, we as humans, right, whatever we fear, or whatever we don't understand, we fear. And so then that makes people act in certain ways, right? And sometimes it's in violent ways, unfortunately. So anyway, so by me educating folks, I feel that that's going to help people lower that fear. It's going to help people have a better, greater understanding, as well as more compassion and respect for the trans community. Okay, now I'm going to start with a quick poll. Kelsey, if you'll put up poll number 1, please. So give me an idea of where everyone is at. So if everyone would be so kind as to answer this one question. Okay, we're almost there. A few more people. Oh, poll's been closed. Okay, so the majority of you answered this correctly. Let me start with the few of you that answered with, are you transgender? That is not a question that you would ask someone. Both of the top 2 questions are questions that you would not ask anyone. And we'll get more into it. It really doesn't matter if somebody is trans or not, ultimately. And it also, I mean, obviously nobody answered the middle question. And so you all know that it's just inappropriate to ask people about their genitals or what surgeries they've had or things like that, right? Okay, so excellent job on that first poll. Now, the first thing I'm gonna say to this though is, with me, one of the perks you get by me being the presenter, or if you work with me going forward, is that, like the introduction said, I open myself up to the world. So what that means is that you get to ignore this first question when it comes to me. You get to ask me absolutely anything. And I really mean that, absolutely anything. There's only one question that you can't ask me, and that is what my name was previously. Because that question is out of curiosity and not educational. Now, if you want to ask about like how I, chose my name, or the process about getting a new name and all of that kinds of thing, happy to answer any of that. But just to, curiosity of what my name was previously, it's the only question that is off limits. And I really mean that. You want to know about the challenges and struggles of transitioning. You want to know about the joys. You want to know about the emotional stuff that you go through. You want to know about my surgeries, any of it. I'm happy to answer any of those questions when we're working together. All right. So talking with a friend, like the reason why I wrote that as the title of this presentation is because for two reasons, quite honestly. One is that, a little bit the information I'm going to give you is so that you will be better equipped to talk with a friend that might be trans. And the other reason is because of my style of presenting. I really like it to be like a conversation. I absolutely encourage you to ask me questions at any time. There will be specific times that I'll pause for questions. And if you have a question you want to make sure you don't forget, just type it in the chat box. Now, with that being said, let me just say, there's obviously, you probably all know this, but I'm just going to say it just in case, that there's a couple of options in the chat box, right? If you put it out there to everyone, then obviously everyone's going to see your question. If you choose me specifically, then only I will see your question. And then with that being said, the one last thing I want to say is that if you want me to ask your question but not address you, so you don't want me to say, John, blah, 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 then above your question, as you start to type anonymous. So that's the first thing I see before I read your question. And then I won't say your name or what have you. All right, hopefully that is clear to everyone. And the last thing before we move on that I want to share is, even though I do this and I open up my life and share, the knowledge and things that I have with y'all, that still does not mean that I am the expert of all things trans. I only have my own experiences. And of course, I've done research about other things because I'm not going through all the experiences of everyone, right? But we all have our own experiences, is my point. So I will do the best I can to answer your questions, and anything that I don't know, I will either steer you in a direction or I am happy to find out the answer for you and contact you later. All right, so moving on. Let's see if somebody has a question already right away, because I just, I had my chat box closed. All right, it's just still introductions, excellent. So, today's conversation, we'll start out with a little bit about myself. And specifically, I'm going to be just talking about like the labels we all take on and that kind of stuff. And then we'll jump into, I'm going to give you some tips on pronouns and dead names. And then I'm going to talk with you a little bit and share how we can work together going forward if you choose to. All right, so about me, we all have labels, right? Excuse me, we all have different labels in our lives. So the ones that you see on the screen are, what we would call like our professional labels, right? But then there's a lot of other labels we have, like, brother or son or, mother, father, colleague, lover, right? We have lots and lots of labels as we go through life. So more specific to this topic though, let me just share, a couple of other labels that I have. Specifically, like, for example, a label that would identify me as F to M, which means female to male, or AFAB, which is assigned female at birth. Now, I am, and by the way, there's lots of other labels, right? Like, there's the opposite of those, M to F, and then, AMAB, like assigned male at birth, those kinds of things, right? And we're just going to stick with these for now. I'm going to speak to these because it pertains to me, and I'd be able to give you better examples. So here's the thing. I think that, this is my opinion, that we are moving to a culture where gender is going to no longer be important. It might take us a little bit to get there, And I believe that that's the direction we're headed. It really doesn't matter, in my opinion, what somebody's gender is. What matters is how we treat each other, right? So anyway, I'm a little sidetracked, but what the point that I want to make, here's a quick example for you. You know how when we're born, right, a woman goes in, she's having a baby, and and I apologize, maybe this isn't how it exactly works anymore, but you'll get the point. She goes in, she's having a baby, and the baby comes out, and they suction it, clean it up, spank it on the butt, whatever, right? Make it cry. And the doctor says, congratulations, you have a healthy baby boy, or whatever it is, right? Now, what if the woman has a baby, or I shouldn't even say woman anymore because there's trans guys that have babies. The person has a baby, and the baby comes out, and they clean it up and suction it and slap it on the behind. And what if they just said, congratulations, you have a healthy baby? And then what if from that moment on, each child is just treated like neutrally, like each child gets to figure out on their own what they like, what they don't like, and therefore at some point what their gender is. They're offered all the toys options in the world, they're offered all the colors in the world, all of it. What if? I think that this is where we're heading, and I think like this, that really excites me. So I'm really curious. I'm going to check the chat real quick because I feel like somebody just sent something a minute ago. Because I'm really curious if anybody has thoughts around that. Because here's the thing, by the way, gender, and this usually, it's hard for some people to wrap their heads around this, but gender is a social construct. We created gender. We created gender. We created it by what genitalia, we as the people, I mean, not just you and I, by what does it mean to be male? And at some point people said, well, men, if you have a penis, you're a man. And if you have a vagina, you're a woman. Or, and women only do these jobs and men only do these jobs. And you know what I mean? And it's a social construct. We created that. And men should be this way. Men should, women should be that way. And I just think that that's not the way we're going anymore. If we can create this social construct, if we can create gender, then we can change it or take it away as well. All right, so here's a question that I'm getting. What you are talking about now is pertinent to me right now because I am refusing to go to a gender reveal party of a good friend and she is mad. Yes, and gender reveal parties are all the rage, right? And I really appreciate what you are sharing, Stacy. Yes, they are pretty silly. And I had a friend, I can't remember, I shouldn't have even brought this up because I can't even remember what she ended up doing, but she wore a specific t-shirt to a gender reveal party that made everybody at the party uncomfortable because it had something to do with, that we don't know this child's gender. So yeah, I totally get it. And this is exactly what I'm speaking to. Thank you so much, Stacey, for bringing it up. We don't know a child's gender at birth. We don't know a child's gender until they tell us so. Yeah, and I know that that's really scary for some folks, but it's true. I hate to break it to you. It's true. It didn't matter, for example, that somebody, people told me all my life that I was female. That didn't matter because inside I knew. And all it did was scare me. All it did was make me live from fear and not be able to be my true authentic self until the age of 45. you know, and I try not to let that bother me, you know, that half of my life, you know, I didn't get to live it as my true authentic self. With that being said, I'm also really grateful because there's very few people on the planet that truly get to experience, you know, two sides of the spectrum, right? Like, I'm in a really unique position. I lived half my life female-bodied, and I know what that means and how I was treated and what that means in this country, right? And now I get to live second half of my life as male and how I'm treated and what that means in this country and do something about it. So I'm in a really unique position, and so I'm actually really grateful for that as well. All right, let's move into tips. So the first one, have you ever been unsure of someone's gender? In this day and age, yes, of course, right? So here's my question to you. When is it absolutely necessary to know somebody's gender? And I'm really inviting you all to, maybe not all, I can't get to everybody's questions or answers, but I really am inviting you all to think about this. And a few of you chat it to me, like, when is it absolutely necessary to know somebody's gender? I ask this at all of my trainings because, one, I am open to learning as well, because I can't think of everything. And two, like, I actually have had a response that I will share with you in a moment of when we think we need to know somebody's gender. That made sense to me. So anybody have any ideas when we absolutely need to know someone's gender? All right. So this is one that often comes up, a healthcare provider. And here's my response to that. So I do specific presentations for healthcare providers and insurance workers. And they often, you know, on their intake forms and so on and so forth, they often ask the gender, right? And sometimes healthcare providers don't need to know that information, believe it or not. Like, for example, if I'm going in because I need surgery on my knee, do they need to know my gender to do a surgery on my knee? I don't think so. You know what I mean? Like, do they need to know my gender if I go in with pneumonia or whatever it is? You know what I mean? There's a lot of instances when healthcare providers don't even need to know our gender. Now, so in my opinion, and a lot of trans folks do share this opinion with me, we can share our gender with healthcare providers when it's something that absolutely needs to be shared. So for example, if obviously we have questions about our genitalia or something that's going on in that area, absolutely the healthcare provider is going to need to know some information, right? But most of the time, believe it or not, healthcare providers don't need that information up front. Let's see. When we need to refer to them by pronouns instead of their full name. So this is just normal. Like, even if you're not a trans person, you're going to use our pronouns the same as you would, you know, a cis person, the same as you would a friend that's not trans. For those of you that don't know what cis is, it's anybody that's not trans. So unless, of course, you know, here's the tricky part, is that there are some exceptions to the rule, right? Just like in any parts of life. There are a few people out there, usually non-binary folks, that may not want you to use pronouns and just use their name all the time. But generally speaking, you're going to use pronouns in the same way that you would for any other cis folks. All right, so here's what I'm gonna share. Oh, one more, let's see. When a person presents to behavioral health therapy, seeking help with the transition, kids who need help talking to their parents about it. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that that's something they're gonna naturally share with you, right? In that specific kind of conversation. That's my guess. Although, you know, I'm pausing because I just realized that says behavior health and not mental health. So I automatically, when I read that, for whatever reason, I thought of therapists when they go into therapy. So behavioral health, again, I think that is a time where you don't need to know it up front, that's going to be, you know, that's up to them to share it. Okay, and then this last one, and then we're going to move on for a moment. If you're talking specifically about genitals, you wouldn't necessarily be talking about gender, though, correct? Yay, Ashley, you get a gold star. Yes, so genitals, again, like, and sometimes, so this is actually a great example, Ashley. I'm so glad that you just pointed this out, because it's a great example, by the way. I mess up sometimes. And so, because I was, you know, conditioned in this life, just like everyone else, right, for 45 years in a specific way, or even still now, but I work much more on that than most people.
Thanks to Jaiden so far. We're taking a pause just because he's got some loud trains that sometimes go by and it makes it difficult to hear. But we do have some really great questions coming in through the chat box. So I'll just do a summary. So when we come back together, you kind of have those a bit. So yeah, okay, we're good. All right, awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for jumping in. Luckily, the trains are pretty short. All right, let me see, get back to where I was at. Oh, you're right, so genitals. Right, so just because somebody has a penis does not mean that they're not female. They don't identify as female. So that is fantastic, Ashley, fantastic question. Thank you so much for saying that. If you are dating someone, all right, so this one's tricky, Steve. And I'm really glad that you said this one as well, because a lot of people have really strong feelings about this one in particular. There's some folks that think that trans folks should come out to someone they're interested in dating right away, first time you're getting together, that kind of thing, right? And then there's some folks, or trans community, like, we get to date just like anyone else, which means the very first time that we get together with someone, we don't know if we're going to be dating them. Like, we're just getting to know them, and they might just be a friend, or maybe it's going to be nothing. And so this is a really personal thing for us to share, number one. And number two, it actually can be scary, meaning, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Dangerous. It can be dangerous for us. There's still a lot of folks out there that want to do us harm, unfortunately. So yes, of course we're going to share with somebody that we're dating. However, it's still up to us when we feel safe. Most of the time, and again, it depends on the person, but most of the time it's not going to be on that very first, you know, hi, I'm Jaiden, I'm trans, and I've had this and this surgery, or have not had this surgery. Like, most of the time it's not going to be that. So yeah, thank you again for that question. Let's see, behavioral health is used interchangeably with the term mental health. Oh, okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that for me. I'm non-binary. I believe no one needs to know your gender. Simply stating your pronouns is good enough. Awesome. Thank you, Alexandria. And thank you for being brave enough to out yourself. So yes, the only time, I'm going to share this, and then we're going to move on. The only time that someone has shared with me in previous presentations why we absolutely need to know somebody's gender. And I'm still like, I still am like trying this one on, if you will, like looking at it from all angles. But it's in, you know, in our society, it's when you want to introduce somebody formally, then you want to know their gender because of the whole Mr. and Mrs. and mix, right? So there's that, you know, I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Jones, for example. that one, I feel like I can get away with just saying, Kelsey, is that train too loud again? Never mind, it's gone.
Yeah, no, we heard a little bit, but it was fine.
Okay, all right, great. I feel you can get away with the formal introductions in that sense just by like allowing them to introduce themselves, right? Somehow diverting it so that they have to introduce themselves. So the one time though is like, it was when I was presenting with attorneys with a big law firm. And what they said was like, in the courtroom, it was necessary. You know, on the whole court records and all of that was when they have to be able to say it. So because I'm not an attorney, because I'm not part of that, part of that culture, I gotta trust what they're saying. So that's the only time I can think of. All right, next. Have you ever been unsure of someone's pronouns? Again, of course, right? In this day and age, there's definitely times when we're unsure of people's pronouns. So what's the best way to find out somebody's pronouns? Just ask, right? Ask someone. That is a very appropriate question to ask. Now, one tip that I will give you is it's no longer the way to ask is no longer saying what are your preferred pronouns, because preferred implies that we had a choice. So now you just ask, what pronouns do you use? Simple as that. A couple of other things that you can do is, these totally depend on your comfortability. When you introduce yourself, you can say, hi, my name is John Smith. My pronouns are he, him. And often people will respond in kind. Not always, but often people will just offer it up at the same time when they introduce themselves. And also, obviously, not everyone is comfortable introducing themselves in that way. But here's the thing. Those of you that are willing to push your edge and introduce yourself in that way, you're helping to normalize it for us. Because, you know, for the most part right now, it's only the trans community that has to say their pronouns. And so now that outs us, right? And so if everyone starts to do it, it helps to normalize it, and then nobody knows nothing, which is, right, we're all just one anyway, right? So those of you that are comfortable with that, I highly encourage you to push your edge or to do that. Another way, which a lot of people are taking on, is by putting your pronouns in the bottom of your emails. That's an easy one, right? So thank you for those of you that are already doing that. And then also when you go places where you have to have a name tag, add your pronouns under your name. That's another really easy one. Because again, like, you don't even have to say anything. People will just see it and hopefully start to do the same. And these are all ways that are really just show care and compassion and respect for the trans community. Okay, couple other things sent to me. What if is an anxiety thing? For example, I am a victim of sexual assault, and when it comes to my gynecological health, I am more comfortable with a female due to the fact that I was assaulted by a male. I'm pausing because I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question. Are you asking as far as the first question goes? I mean, as like as far as like when to tell, something to do with, okay, let me look here real quick. When it's absolutely necessary to know somebody's gender. Let me just say, I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question. And by the way, this person is remaining anonymous. I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question. So just what I'll say is, and if you want to say more, please feel free. I greatly would love it. But what I'm saying is, first of all, is thank you so much for taking care of yourself. This is what the first thing that jumps out at me about this question is you taking care of yourself and knowing what's going to help you to be more comfortable, you know, when you have to go for those kinds of appointments. Absolutely. That is first and foremost, which goes into part of what I was speaking to, which is the trans community needs to take care of themselves and not always just out themselves right off the bat, right? Even if it's healthcare providers. Because in part of why I do some of these trainings specifically to healthcare providers is because we are treated, the trans community is treated so poorly still by many, many healthcare providers. And it often causes a lot of those suicide attempts, believe it or not. So that's why I was speaking to that. Okay, I know you're moving on, but the one time that I can think of needing to know someone's gender is if there is known trauma around misgendering. I can't imagine that it's never not traumatic. For example, I had made a note in the computer around a consumer's pronouns so that they would not be misgendered when called for appointments or interacted with the agency. This was also an out and proud young person. Thank you, Ashley, so much for doing that. Yeah, that's a good point. I actually, yeah, I'm pausing, obviously, as you can tell, because so often when I get questions, I put myself in those shoes. And at the same time, that's not always fair because I'm a very unique individual, meaning, you know, like obviously I'm opening up my life to people and answering any questions which is, you know, the opposite, quite honestly, of most trans folks. So I'm unique in that way, but just as a quick side note, the reason why I do that, not only to educate, but also is because I feel like who better to educate cis folks? I mean, sure, you can Google stuff, but as we all know, we learn best from one another. We learn best when it's on more of a personal level. So yeah, I just feel that that's important. So in this situation, I actually, for myself, Ashley, I actually appreciate this. I really appreciate you doing this. And I think that, you know, quite honestly, because we're never going to change this, I feel like anyway, this is one area that we're not going to change in healthcare. They're always going to have our gender or sex in the computer. That it's great when it's used to make sure that they're going to use our proper pronouns, right? So in that sense, I totally get it. I'm totally with you on that. And thank you for doing that. Yeah, like I said, it's actually can be really tricky. It's so personal to a lot of people, how some of this is done. All right, so let me make sure I covered all that I wanted to do that. All right, next question. Have you ever been nervous you'll mess up, that you'll just mess up around pronouns and dead names for that matter? And the answer again, of course, right? Like, because even I am, like I said, I mess up. I still mess up sometimes. This is all new to us. Not like being trans is not a new thing. It's been around since the 1300s. It's not new. And for how we are like taught how to use, you know, pronouns like they, them, and anyway, how we've been conditioned to recognize folks, right? It's all how we're wired up. And so there's times when even I mess up. All right, Kelsey, if you'll share that second poll, please. We're gonna do another quick question for everyone. All right, so everyone please go ahead and answer this. When you mess up someone's pronouns, is it best to? All right, y'all are awesome. 100% correct. Congratulations. So let me just go over these other ones really quickly, even though it sounds like y'all totally get it. So I'm gonna actually start at the bottom because this happens, right? Sometimes people mess up and they just talk like nobody noticed. And honestly, correcting yourself and move on is the #1 absolute best thing to do. If for some reason you're not comfortable doing that, the bottom answer, it would be the second best answer to do. Because sometimes people will think like, here, I'll just give you a quick example. My dear mother, she's in her 80s. I started transitioning, let's see, how long has it been now? Almost 6 years ago, 5 years ago. And she still uses the wrong pronouns sometimes. Now, of course, it used to feel really hurtful because oftentimes you can tell when somebody's trying, and then you can tell when people are not trying and they just don't care, right? And so it feels really hurtful when it feels like people aren't trying and therefore not respecting you. And then at some point, I realized like this isn't about me. And she's so old that people actually probably are thinking, oh, this poor woman like is getting delusional that she doesn't even recognize her own son. So now I just like, we as trans folks, we also get tired of correcting people, which by the way, Lynn, thank you for sharing in the chat about, yes, we will correct you. And sometimes it gets tiring and hurtful. And it gets old, right? Like sometimes it's hard to correct somebody every 5 minutes. But, all right, so then the last one, apologizing profusely, right then and there in front of everyone. Never appropriate, because now all you're doing is drawing attention to the situation. So for example, like if you're in front of me and you're saying like, Jaiden, and there's a group of us standing there, right? And then you turn to somebody and say, yeah, like, she was just telling about her golf stroke. I mean, oh my God, Jaiden, I'm so sorry, please, you got to give me more time, please, blah, 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 right? Now, all you're doing is making us all uncomfortable and bringing a whole bunch of attention to it. It's just, yeah, that's not cool. So the absolute best thing is like, and he was telling me about his golf stroke and how amazing it is and blah, blah, blah. You just keep going. And that's that. Now, sometimes, it might not hurt also at some point when you're all by yourself with the person to say, man, I apologize for messing up, a little bit ago, I'm working on them, I'll do better. Period, done, end of story. There's none, you don't have to go on and on about it as well. All right. Nicely done again, everyone. Let's see, there's another one. I have experienced fumbling my pronouns a few years ago with an employee who had transitioned F to M. Felt badly, corrected myself, and moved on. He stood there laughing at me. He was very kind and patient. Yes. Luckily, there are some of us that are kind and patient out there. Not everyone, unfortunately, but I'm glad that you had that experience. All right. Get rid of that. Okay, lastly, dead names. I'm assuming everyone knows what dead names are. Let's not make assumptions. So dead names are, for example, the name that I was given at birth. And so it's the name that we had before we change our name, for those of us that are trans folks. So my old name is considered my dead name. So a couple of tips about that, about dead names. Don't ever, ever, ever use somebody's dead name. If they introduce you, like even if you've known them all your life and they now say, my name is now Jaiden and I use he, him pronouns, respect that, no matter what. So for example, a time that it can be challenging for some folks is like, even if you are at a party or, family reunion or whatever, right? And you're talking about, I'm just using myself as an example, you're talking about me in the past, you're still, even though like, we're not trying to erase your memories of us, which is something that actually I had this conversation with my father not that long ago. And he apparently the family, unbeknownst to me, was really upset and felt like I was trying to make them like forget all the past memories. And that's not it at all. I don't ever want to forget any of the memories. I had a great childhood, right? Like there's a lot of things I want to remember and we can still talk about. It's just that when we talk about those things in the past, you're still going to call me Jaiden. Yep, Jaiden used to do this, or whatever. And even if it is, even if you're talking about or sharing a story of something that I was doing that's a typical female thing to do, you're still going to use the name Jaiden. And yes, I know that can be challenging for some folks, but these are just tips I'm giving you. Let's see if there's anything else around that. Oh, I just wrote this other really quick thing because a lot of folks, I don't know if it's fair to say a lot, but I have run into many people that when we come out as trans, they go through this grieving process. And sometimes it's hard for us to understand this. I'm actually starting to understand it now. People are grieving what they have known me to be, right? And they feel like that person's gone. And I've included this in with dead names because one of the things I say to people is that the name is dead, the person is not. So changing our gender definitely changes us in a way, right? Obviously, not just physically, but because of conditioning and so on and so forth, there's a lot that happens. And so it definitely changes us in a way. However, at our core, we're still that same person. One example that I give is, even if I had not transitioned, like some of the changes that I go through is just normal changes that I would have gone through. Like I don't know if I'm saying that clearly. Some of the ways that I've changed since transitioning are still some of the ways I would have changed even if I had not transitioned, right? Just because of life experiences and, spiritual growth and different things, right? So, yeah, hopefully that makes sense to folks. All right, here's one of the question times. Anyone have more questions? I'm going to pause for a minute for people to ask questions. Because we're going to go into next how we might work together, those of you that might be interested going forward after today. I've always viewed it as a transition for everyone. It is absolutely a transition for everyone. Ashley, you're absolutely correct. And an unfortunate thing about that is it's when we first start transitioning, although this is something that we choose, we can choose to, I say choose in quotes because being trans is not a choice. However, like just being gay, you can choose to live a straight cis life and be unhappy, right? And so there's that choice. However, who we truly are is not the choice. I just want to be clear about that. So even though we choose to transition, it's a very challenging process. It is not easy at all. And so we get really focused inwardly, like on ourselves, and it might look really selfish, but believe me when I say it's not easy. It is really not easy to go through all that we have to go through personally, along with the outside stuff that we have to go through from others, from family, from society, so on and so forth. And so we forget, especially early on, it takes us a minute. We forget that yes, everyone in our lives, especially close to us and family, are transitioning as well. It's a true statement. Thank you for bringing that in. We are often asked how providers can respect the non-use of dead names, but they often cite difficulty given the legal paperwork. Has not yet been changed. Any advice? Yes. So even before the name has been changed legally, if your system, because a lot of systems are doing this already, if your system isn't doing this already, I highly encourage you to figure it out quickly, that you can put a space for the legal name, and then you can put a space for the preferred name, and have that always pop up first somehow. Like, you got to train your staff to always check for the preferred name first. Because we understand that, you know, until our name is changed legally, you all have to do your jobs, right? Like insurance, everything's got to go by the legal name. We totally get that. So it's just a respect thing to somehow, like I said, share with the staff to please look at the preferred name first on the documents. Now, once the name is changed legally though, get that dead name off of everything. And I have actually run into a situation where they won't remove my dead name, and I don't think it's appropriate, and I will be doing something about it. It's on my life insurance policy. They're saying whatever the policy, however the policy was opened, the gender that the policy was opened as has to remain, and I don't agree with that. So I will be looking into, like, because if I went and got a new life insurance policy right now, they only know me as male. And so anyway, that's something, just an example. The one place where they won't remove my dead name, or my gender actually. Let me know if there's more to that I didn't answer for you. And then the next question, the issue is even more challenging when you work with transitioning kids and parents who do not accept their transition. Absolutely, Stacy. And I'm actually going to speak about that briefly in how you can work with me going forward if you choose. Yeah, that I have there's a really soft place in my heart, obviously, for trans youth. As you saw with those suicide rates for youth, that's as young as, I will tell you, 6 years old. I know a 6-year-old that tried to commit suicide because they weren't in the right body. So yeah, it's heartbreaking to me. I have a really soft spot. I will do anything for support of trans youth. Yes, need to revise intake forms and software to prioritize preferred name and pronouns. Thank you so much. Yes, yes. All right, moving on. Feel free to put questions down when you think of them, but I'm gonna keep going here because I wanna make sure and have time to get through this. All right, so there's several things that I offer as part of my business. Specific to my trainings and consulting part of my business. As you saw, I'm also do Reiki and shaman work and different things like that. Not speaking about that today. You feel free to email me if you have questions about that as well, though. All right, so the first way is training facilitation. So you can hire me to do, they're about 75-minute trainings, 1 time per week for 3 consecutive weeks in a row. The reason why I do this, when I first started doing, presentations is what I'll call it, they were just like the one and done type of thing, right? Like, people hired me, I'd go in and present for anywhere from 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours usually, and then done, right? And as we know, we as humans, no matter how great our intention, we don't retain as much in that type of presentation. Whereas I switched it to these types of trainings 3 consecutive weeks in a row because you have time to try it on or to practice or whatever it is in between each one. And then the next week when you see me again, you can ask the questions and say, like, here's something I tried and it didn't go so well or whatever it is, right? Like, and then you get that feedback and we get the communication and the interaction with one another. And the better that we know each other, more time that we spend together, we just retain more as humans. We are communal beings. We like to connect. So this is why I changed it to this format. And then preferably, I like it to be 50 participants or less in person. Honestly, the smaller the better, because I love for this to be more like a conversation, especially in person. I want people to feel heard and have the opportunity to ask their questions and all of that. And so, 50 people even, gets to be a lot, and some people still don't talk. And it's much different than 200 or 500. So, yeah, so that's the first way. And then, so those include, of course, there's three different takeaways than what I did for you today. You also get my whole story, which often brings up a lot of questions for folks. And then the same as today, you get to ask any questions. And we have more time, obviously, when we do the trainings in this manner, rather than just this webinar. And so a lot more deeper questions typically get asked. Personal questions get asked, which are fun to me. I know some of you are like, oh, he says we can ask any question, but he really doesn't mean that. I'm serious. Like, that's fun to me. It's fun to me to talk about those questions. Okay, and then the next way, after those 3 consecutive weeks, then there's the tailored trainings. First of all, it can be a continuation of those 3 weeks. So what that means is, like, let's say after those 3 consecutive week trainings are done, your organization or department realizes, oh, we need more information on that. Or, okay, great, this was a great foundation, and now we want to know about this, like maybe on, the intersectionalities of my life, or on how to be a better ally, just as a couple examples. So then you can hire me to come back and do these tailored trainings specific to what your department or company wants me to do. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the tailored trainings can also be like for medical and or insurance workers. And we get more into, the care, obviously how to care for trans folks, as well as usually more specific about the surgeries and things like that, right? And then the last one under this section is ongoing trainings. And what that one usually looks like is, like, I go into a company and do the big overall first trainings, right, that I went over first. And then as they hire more people, I become part of their staff onboarding. And so, usually, new staff have to go through certain things, right? Go to HR and fill out all the paperwork, go to this department to whatever, right? And I become part of that, where they have to now meet with me as part of their onboarding. And I give them, my foundation training, which is the essentials of gender identity. So those are all the training facilitations. Let me see here, I have a question. Awesome. Thanks, Kelsey. I'm assuming that's Kelsey anyway. Right?
Yes, it's me. I'm just kind of adding some notes into the chat box for folks. So, and just a recap there is, we are often asked, how do I partner with a cultural broker? How do I find a cultural broker? What should my CLC program development or trainings look like when it comes to gender identity? And today you're really getting, some brilliant expertise from Jaiden, from someone who offers these trainings and can partner with you to offer these types of trainings, but also for you to kind of have a window, almost a portal into what does successful CLC programming look like. And I think that's a big part of what we're trying to provide you with in terms of technical assistance for this year's webinar series, just to kind of show you sort of this menu of options that you could be doing, so we can elevate our programming to the next level.
Awesome. All right, so then hiring me maybe, as your consultant, who is this available to? So as an example, if your department or company or whoever hired me as the consultant, it's a different fee scale, first of all, because there's a difference there, right? So often with the consulting piece, there's a retainer. And then the first example I have there is like, let's say that there's a trans person or non-binary person on your staff who there's some incident that happens and that specific person needs or wants support. Then I'm available to them personally as the consultant and to give them support on maybe they don't know what to do next on whatever the situation is. Now, likewise though, maybe that same incident, maybe it's the supervisor of that person that needs some support and they're not sure what to do or how to address this person because of course they want to be fair and they also don't want to do something illegal, right? And so I can be there as support for the supervisor as well. And then maybe it's these two people or maybe it's three people, whatever, want help in getting back on the same page, right? Like they really, the trans person still wants to work there, the supervisor still wants them to work there, and they got to figure this out, right? But they need some help. And so maybe it's kind of a mediation type of situation where I can come in and help that conversation take place. And then the last example under that one is for like, if there's a board or maybe it's the managers of that department, some kind of question or questions comes up and you want to just call me and be like, Jaiden, we have some questions that we need answered. So that's one way, right? Maybe it's a quick video call or even a phone call, whatever it is. Or you can bring me in and happy to talk to, the managers or the board. Now, with that being said, this piece, there's a fine line, right, between it being consulting and a training. So we'd have to have conversation around that, of course, but it is a possibility here. Lastly, as part of this part of my business, the family support. So like I said, there's a soft spot for trans youth for me. And so what I offer here is, if, for example, there's a child in the home that thinks or knows that they may be trans or they are trans, and whether the parents are supportive or not, if they're willing to reach out, or maybe it's part of the foster care system or the family support system of the state, and those workers get wind of this, I can be contacted. And the way that I like to do this is that I like to go into the home first, because one, I want to see, and by the way, that very first meeting, I encourage anybody that lives in the home to attend that first meeting, because I want to see what kind of support this child is getting or not getting, right? And I also want to see get a sense of where everybody's at. And then it's tailored to how I'm going to work with that family, is tailored to each specific family. So for example, I'll just throw this out there. Oftentimes, like the parents are going to think the kid that is trans needs the support. Oftentimes, it's the parents that need the support. And so there might be a combination of that, right? So it might be that I'm meeting with the parents, once a week or once every other week or whatever it is for a period of time. And maybe they're like, and will you be there for my child, And so I can do that as well. Now, all that being said, it's still really important that the child has their own therapist. I am not doing this part of this work as a counselor. So that is, generally speaking, how the family support piece works. All right, any questions about working together? Looks like there are no questions. I have written a book. I wrote it the first year of my transition. How would we contact you? Yes, I will give you that info in a moment, as well as Kelsey, I believe, is going to send out an email. So this book was written my very first year of transitioning. It's a very, very intimate account of my first year of transitioning. So it's literally my journal. I was not going to publish this, and then spiritually heard that I was supposed to, so I did. So yes, it's literally my journal. Anyway, so read at your own risk. It's very personal, and it's a great support. The reason why I share it is, one, obviously I'm supposed to, and it's also great support. It's great support for trans folks, and it's also great support for those that love us. And it's even for people in neither one of those categories. I've had people read it as support to me to, buy my book and read it. And what they find out is that it inspires them in their own life, because they often, what I've heard are things like, wow, if Jaiden can do that, I can at least stand up to my father, or, whatever. So yeah, so I just put that out there. And lastly, here is my contact info. And again, last opportunity for questions. Otherwise, feel free to email me or call me. I'm very happy to email you back or call you back. And Kelsey, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jaiden. We do have a little bit of time, so I think we can hold the space for a few moments if anyone has additional questions before we just add our last little bit of content that we have from the PA Care partnership side of things. So yeah, you do have Jaiden as a resource right now if you'd like to ask any questions that we may not have gotten to in the presentation today.
Yeah, did I miss any as we were going along? Did you notice?
Oh no, in the chat box, I think you got to everyone. One person did ask a question about when would you need to know someone's gender? They asked when you're prescribing medication.
Oh, when prescribing medication. So obviously, yeah, like I said, I'm not a doctor or a pharmacist. My guess is that perhaps the person's wondering if dosages changed with gender. And I don't know if that's true. That's the only thing I can think of. So yeah, that's one that I'd have to ask some of my medical friends. And I'm happy to do that. If somebody wants to send me a message, happy to get back to them. Was your family supportive during your transition? That has greatly varied. When I first came out, there were several family members. I grew up in a very large family, by the way, and there were several family members that had a really hard time. And to be quite honest, to this day, I'm not really sure why. Like, if I had to guess, because my family has a hard time with emotions. So for example, one of my brothers, it came out as anger. And I just, held space and would just send him love and compassion and just, give him some space and time is what I assumed he needed. I had a brother that passed away this past year, and it was during that, while we were dealing with that some of this came up for that brother that was angry. And so we had a couple of really hard, big conversations. And I think that really helped. Things seem to have shifted a little bit, but yeah, it's definitely changed over the years. Some of my family has definitely had a hard time. There's also some family that are still dealing with it. Family support, quite honestly, is one of the hardest pieces for me. Let's see, when and how did you know you were born in the wrong body? Oh man, Cami, that is part of my story that I share when y'all hire me. I go through that whole process for you because it's not easy. What I will share in this moment for you though is the very first time it came up for me was, I used to know the exact number of years, but now that's been a few years back. So it was when I was about 30, so about 21 years ago was the first time that it really came up for me. And because of how trans folks were seen at that time in our country, it was all negative. And so it scared me. And so I put that under lock and key. I ignored it real quick for a long time, sadly.
Jaiden, I wonder if you can speak to how, based on your experience or what you might touch upon in your trainings or what people should be aware of in terms of intersectionality for the trans community. How has your experience being, sort of a visibly racialized person, how has that also impacted your trans identity?
Kelsey, that's a really big conversation, actually, because specifically, like for me, I have a lot of intersectionalities of my life. So for example, I was a Black female, right? And so there's that piece. And then I came out as a lesbian. And so then I was a Black lesbian. I also I was actually adopted and grew up in a white family. And so there's that intersectionality and all of the oppression and therefore conditioning from all of that. And then, transitioning to male. Now I'm a Black male in this country, and which has a whole different way that I'm treated, right? And honestly, my transition started at the time when Black men were being shot for no reason by the police. And so there's a lot of all of that that goes on that I deal with as well. Lastly, even sexuality changes, which again, get into this in my presentations, but some people confuse sexuality with gender identity sometimes, and it's two completely different things. And so, for example, like I said, I identified as lesbian for the majority of my life. And so if that would have stayed the same, which this does happen for some trans guys, if they're strictly only attracted to female-bodied folks or women and people that identify as women, then that means they're now straight. And so they go from being part of the gay community or lesbian to being straight, which is, that's a whole nother thing. And then for some of us, and even medical personnel aren't really sure why, but for some reason, when we start testosterone, something changes somewhere. and we start to get more attracted to men again. Some of us, not everyone, but many of us. And so then there's a lot of trans guys that become gay men. And for myself, for example, I identify as pansexual, which means it's all about the heart and spiritual connection for me. It doesn't matter what's between your legs. When it comes to sex, it'll all pan out. So, so all of these ways and intersectionalities affect our lives in many different ways.
Well, thank you so much for that. I actually couldn't think of a better way to transition to the closing portion of today's webinar. I feel like you left all of us with some really great ideas of how to bolster our work in this area, particularly as it pertains to cultural and linguistic competency, and particularly how partnering with someone like yourself and other cultural brokers can really enhance our overall program development, which is not just about developing programs for programs, it's about impacting people and their lives and the youth and families that we serve. So we can't thank you enough for being one of our keynote speakers today. And Folks, please don't sign off just yet. We're going to transition to the last little bit of our closing portion for today. So just bear with us as we change over the PowerPoint.
While Kelsey's doing that, thank you all for having me today and for your great questions. Yeah, it's been an honor.
Well, it's definitely been our honor as well to have you participate with us. So I think everyone now should see our larger screen. Again, that's Jaiden's information on the right-hand side along with mine. For folks that may not have met me before, again, I'm the CLC coordinator. This is a photo of me and my email. Again, please feel free to reach out to Jaiden if you have additional questions, particularly if you're interested in partnering with him to develop some CLC programming, policy revision, just all of the different types of consulting and training opportunities that he mentioned during the presentation. So lastly, this is our first installment of a larger series. We have 2 more sessions in our 2020 CLC webinar series. Our next one is on Thursday, March 26th, the same time from 2:30 to 4. Make sure that you register for each individual session. They have separate registrations. So the Zoom link for today will be different for each session. So the next one is We Are Not Invisible, Protecting Latina Mental Health in Schools. It's with Noelia Rivera Calderon, who will be speaking very passionately about her work as a legal advocate and mental health advocate for Latina girls, and a study that was done about Latina girl mental health access in Philadelphia schools. And then our last session is being hosted by Sharon Washington, who's another great CLC trainer, who will be speaking about intersectionality matters, mitigating unconscious bias and unintended racism in behavioral health care. And that's on May 28th of 2020. So again, we can't thank you all enough for joining us today. We really appreciate all of your attention. Cultural competence and linguistic competence are a life's journey, not a destination. So we're wishing you all safe travels. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me. We will be sending the PowerPoints with Jaiden's contact information to those who registered for today's webinar, and the PowerPoints, as long as the webinar recording, along with what will be available on our PA Care Partnership website. So thank you to everyone for signing on today, and that concludes our webinar.